Okay, let's unpack this. Think about the last time you told a colleague you were swamped.
Oh, yeah. Such a classic phrase.
Right, because, you weren't literally sinking into a marshland. Your desk wasn't covered in algae.
Well, hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully. But you were deploying this highly specific, universally understood code, right, to protect your time and just build a wall around your attention.
Exactly. Because we all do this.
We do. We speak this completely separate language between the hours of 9 and 5, and most of us don't even realize we're fluent in it.
It's an incredibly dense linguistic ecosystem.
Yeah.
And we rarely stop to examine the architecture of the sentences we use every single day, mostly because, well, we're just trying to survive until Friday.
That is so true. Just holding out for the weekend. So today, we are going to put that ecosystem under a microscope.
I'm ready.
For this deep dive, our source material is a document featuring two people, John and Emma. And on the surface, this document is designed as an instructional guide. It's literally an English language lesson detailing 100 essential phrases for professional English in the office.
Right. It looks like a standard textbook exercise.
Yeah, exactly. But when you look closely at what John and Emma are actually discussing, like the scenarios they are navigating, they aren't just teaching vocabulary.
No, not at all. They are acting as unwitting anthropologists.
Yes, unwitting anthropologists. It's brilliant.
They've effectively created this sociological blueprint of the modern corporate workspace. They are laying out all the hidden scripts of survival, the power dynamics, and honestly, the emotional labor.
And we're going to decode that script today. Because whether you are, running a multinational corporation or you just started as a junior analyst this very morning, you are relying on these exact phrases to manage expectations.
And mask your frustration.
Oh, heavily masking frustrations. And frankly, politely manipulating the people around you.
It's all about polite manipulation.
So let's look at how the day actually begins. Before a single spreadsheet is opened or, a single email is sent, the psychological stage has to be set. And in our source material, John and Emma start their discussion by debating the physical environment itself.
Which is incredibly telling, right, about where work culture is right now.
Yeah, how so?
Well, the rigid concept of the office as this monolithic, fluorescent lit room where everyone gathers at the same time, that's totally fractured.
Oh, completely.
Emma mentions that her ideal setup is taking her laptop to a coffee shop very early in the morning, like between 7 and 8. And she acknowledges it sounds mundane, but she insists the peaceful atmosphere is where she finds her focus.
Meanwhile, John represents the complete opposite end of the spectrum here. He tells Emma about his attempt to work in a coffee shop, but he went at noon.
Which is on a Sunday.
A tactical error of massive proportions. Total disaster. What was he thinking? He complains that the espresso machines were screaming, people were talking over each other, and his concentration was just completely shattered.
Obviously.
Right. So, taking a step back from their literal scheduling conflict, the underlying dynamic here is that productivity is no longer just about the tasks on your desk. It's about sensory curation.
That's a great way to put it, sensory curation. Because the burden of environmental management has shifted entirely onto the worker now.
Right.
Historically, a company provided a desk, a chair, and a quiet-ish room, and that was the infrastructure. But now, you have to engineer your own acoustic and psychological barriers.
You have to build the walls yourself.
Exactly. Emma understands that the early morning coffee shop provides ambient white noise, which for many people acts as a cognitive anchor. But John walked into a chaotic social hub at peak hours and expected a library.
It just shows that part of your job, before you even start working, is diagnosing what kind of sensory inputs you need to function. But let's say you've figured that out. You've curated your environment, or you've just arrived at the actual office. You sit down, and immediately you collide with another human being. You have to execute the morning greeting.
The initiation of the daily social contract.
Right. And John asks Emma a very pragmatic question in the source. He wants to know how to handle a colleague who asks, "How was your weekend?" when you absolutely do not want to have a conversation.
We have all been there.
My instinct here, and I think a lot of people's instinct when they haven't had their coffee yet, is to either just bluntly say, "Fine, I need to get to work," or to fall into the trap of actually telling a 10-minute story about grocery shopping just to be polite.
Right. But both of those instincts are strategically flawed in a corporate environment.
Why flawed?
Well, being blunt signals hostility, which damages the working relationship long term. But telling the 10-minute story, that drains your cognitive reserves before the workday has even officially started.
So you lose either way.
unless you use Emma's solution, which is a masterclass in emotional labor management. She advises John to just say, "Pretty relaxing. How about yours?"
It's a linguistic deflection shield.
Yes. It is entirely about the preservation of bandwidth. She explicitly notes that by flipping the question back to them, you force the other person to carry the conversational load.
It's essentially a game of conversational ping pong or judo. You use their momentum against them.
I like a judo analogy.
Yeah, like they throw a social obligation at you, and instead of catching it and holding on to it, you just pivot and let them run with it. You fulfill the ritual, you acknowledge their existence, you maintain the warmth of the relationship, but you aggressively protect your own morning energy.
Precisely. You let them talk about their nephew's soccer game while you mentally prepare for your 9 a.m. meeting.
And this ritual highlights that office greetings aren't really about information exchange at all, are they?
No one actually needs a comprehensive audit of your Saturday.
Thank goodness.
The greeting is just a diagnostic ping. It's a way for colleagues to test the network and ensure that the professional bond is stable and functional for the rest of the day.
So the network is stable, the greeting has survived. Now we turn to the screen. John points out that the first real task is usually checking messages. But Emma uses a very specific phrasing here that I think we all use without thinking.
Well, this is a good one.
She doesn't say she is going to read her emails. She tells John she needs to go through her emails.
What's fascinating here is the spatial mechanics of that phrasing. Think about how we normally apply the verb read. We read a menu. We read a novel on a Sunday afternoon.
Right, it's relaxing.
Reading is a passive, absorbent, and often leisurely activity. But the phrasal verb go through implies resistance. It implies traversal.
Like you're walking into a windstorm or performing some kind of triage in a medical tent.
Exactly. It frames the inbox not as a collection of reading materials, but as a dense physical obstacle course.
That is so accurate.
When you tell a coworker, "I can't right now, I need to go through my emails," you are elevating the task. You are signaling that this isn't passive consumption. This is active, burdensome, meticulous labor.
You're putting up a giant do not disturb sign. It justifies your total unavailability. Like, I am in the trenches of my inbox right now. Please stand back.
It's an active boundary setting disguised as a status update.
Okay, so you've triaged the inbox. You've survived the peer-to-peer gauntlet of the morning. But eventually, the workday forces a vertical shift. You have to interact with your manager. You are managing up.
All different set of rules.
Exactly. And the source material gets heavily into the mechanics of this, starting with how you initiate contact. Emma offers phrases like, "Can I talk to you about something?" But the one that really stands out is when she advises John to use "sorry to bother you" when a manager looks busy.
Yes, the polite interruption.
You know, I'm going to push back on Emma here. In a lot of modern corporate advice columns, you constantly hear that we apologize too much. Doesn't walking up to someone and saying, "sorry to bother you," immediately lower your status? Doesn't it frame your valid work-related question as an annoyance?
It's a completely understandable reaction to feel like you are groveling or acting subservient there. But if we analyze the specific power dynamic Emma is unlocking here, it's not about low self-worth.
What is it about then?
It's an act of preemptive deference toward their most scarce resource, which is time.
Okay, but how does acknowledging I'm a bother protect me?
Because a manager's primary function is allocating time and attention. By using the word bother, you aren't saying your work is unimportant. You are demonstrating high situational awareness.
Oh, I see.
You are looking at their current state of focus, diagnosing that they're deep into a task, and paying a small verbal toll before you cross the bridge to interrupt them. You are saying, "I recognize that my request requires you to context switch, and I respect the cost of that switch."
So it actually marks you as a socially intelligent professional, not a nuisance.
Exactly. It shows situational awareness rather than weakness.
So it's less of an apology and more of a receipt. You're showing them you understand the hierarchy.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
And once you've paid that toll and you actually ask your question, the vocabulary becomes even more deliberate. John asks how to get more information on a project deadline, and Emma hands him the word clarify. Could you clarify the deadline?
A very safe word.
Again, my instinct, and I think the instinct of anyone who values transparency, is to just be direct. If I don't understand my boss, why shouldn't I just say, "I'm confused," or "You didn't explain this well enough"?
Because the architecture of blame in a corporate setting is incredibly precarious.
Yeah.
If you say, "I am confused," or "I don't get it," you internalize the failure.
Right.
You suggest that your intellect or your comprehension skills are lacking.
Right. You make yourself the weak link in the chain.
Yeah. But if you go the other route and say, you didn't explain this well, you externalize the blame directly onto the manager. You are attacking their communication skills, which triggers defensiveness and aggression.
Yeah. Nobody likes being told they're bad at explaining things, so clarify is the neutral ground.
It's a linguistic miracle worker. When you ask someone to clarify, you are taking the concept of confusion and placing it outside of both of you.
I love that.
You are suggesting that the information itself is just hovering there, slightly out of focus, and you, as two aligned professionals, are simply going to work together to sharpen the image. It removes the ego from the equation entirely.
It really is brilliant. You are demanding better instructions without ever accusing them of being a bad instructor.
Exactly.
And Emma adds a safety net to this interaction. Once the manager clarifies the task, she tells John to use the phrase, "just to confirm, you want me to," and then repeat the instructions back.
This is the establishment of the verbal contract. In a high-stakes environment, memory is subjective and highly unreliable.
Oh, absolutely. 3 days later, a manager will swear they asked for a blue presentation when you know for a fact they asked for green.
Which is why repeating the instructions back is an insurance policy. When you say "just to confirm," you're effectively hitting the record button on the conversation.
Right. You're logging it.
You are forcing the manager to actively agree to the parameters of the task in that exact moment. As the source says, it's always better to ask questions than to do the work wrong. If things go sideways a week later, you have established a shared reality that you can refer back to.
So it's not just polite, it's an absolute necessity for self-preservation.
Completely.
So we've established this flawless veneer of competence with the boss one-on-one, but the reality is a massive portion of the modern workday isn't spent in quiet, isolated task execution. It's spent in the arena.
The group meeting.
The group meeting, and John is incredibly candid about this in the source material. He admits he gets bored in meetings, that they run too long, but he accepts them as a necessary evil.
Meetings are the ultimate theater of corporate culture. And the performance begins long before anyone actually enters the room. It begins with the scheduling negotiations.
Oh, the calendar Tetris.
Right. Emma suggests a very standard, "Can we meet at 2 p.m.?" And John asks for the professional way to say no.
And Emma provides the ultimate diplomatic smoke bomb, "I have a conflict."
It's arguably one of the most powerful phrases in the modern office vocabulary.
Think about the alternative. If someone asks for your time and you say, "I'm busy," or "I have a lot of work to do," what does that instantly provoke?
It invites an arbitration of priorities. The person asking for the meeting will immediately wonder, or even ask out loud, busy doing what?
Right. Is your busy more important than my busy?
Exactly. They will try to calculate if their meeting is more important than whatever it is you're currently doing.
But the word conflict completely shuts down that arbitration. It institutionalizes your unavailability.
That's spot on.
A conflict sounds rigid. It sounds like an unmovable object on your calendar. It could be a meeting with the board of directors, or it could be a 30-minute block you scheduled for yourself to finally go through your emails. The beauty of "I have a conflict" is that it requires absolutely zero supporting evidence.
None at all.
It is a locked door that colleagues are socially conditioned not to try and open.
It creates a boundary without creating an offense. It politely states you are busy without requiring you to justify what you are doing.
But let's say the conflict shield fails, or it's a mandatory meeting. You are in the room. The hardest part of any meeting is trying to steer the conversation when you don't officially have the floor. John asks how to interrupt, and Emma gives him a few options, but the one they really dissect is, "if I may."
John immediately clocks how stiff that sounds. It feels like something out of a Victorian novel.
It does. If I'm... Interject, my good sir. It feels completely unnatural for a modern marketing brainstorm. Why on earth would Emma suggest leaning into such extreme formality?
Because an interruption, at its core, is a hostile act.
A hostile act.
Yes. When you interrupt someone, you are functionally telling them that what you have to say is more important than the completion of their thought. You are seizing power in the room.
Wow, yeah, it's a verbal coup.
Exactly. So to get away with a coup, you have to drape it in extreme deference.
Yeah.
By using an almost antiquated hyperformal phrase like, "if I may," you are cloaking the aggression of the interruption.
Ah, I see.
You are adopting a posture of extreme politeness to neutralize the threat of your sudden dominance in the conversation. It softens the blow just enough that the person you interrupted can yield the floor without feeling like they were shoved out of the way.
That makes perfect sense. You're putting a velvet glove over an iron fist. And this leads perfectly into what happens when you actually get the floor and you need to shoot down someone's idea.
The art of disagreement.
Right. John asks how to disagree without just yelling, "No, that's wrong." Emma's advice here revolves around phrases like, "I see your point, but," or "Have you considered..."
Linguistic separation of the person from the idea.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I look at these phrases as verbal shock absorbers.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like if you are driving a car and you hit a pothole with no suspension, the entire chassis takes a damage. Your teeth rattle. In a meeting, if a colleague floats an idea and you hit it with a flat no, the damage radiates through the entire room.
You bruise their ego, you make them look foolish in front of peers, and you create an adversary.
But when you deploy a phrase like, "I see your point," you are validating their contribution. You are soothing the ego.
Right. You absorb the impact of the bad idea safely.
And then the "but," or the "have you considered," allows you to gently dismantle the idea on purely logical grounds. You are telling them, you are smart, your perspective is valued. However, the math on this proposal is fundamentally broken. It keeps the machinery of the team moving without requiring anyone to lose face.
And eventually, after all the delicate maneuvering and the gentle disagreements, the meeting runs out of time. Someone has to end the theater.
Emma notes that a common sign-off is, "Let's touch base next week." And the source material explicitly highlights the origin of this, that it comes from baseball.
Touching the base so you aren't tagged out.
Right. Which is a very fitting origin when you consider how it functions in an office. It's a mechanism for safety. Emma points out that touching base is rarely a long, deep conversation. It's a brief check-in.
It is the ultimate non-committal exit strategy. When you say, "let's touch base," you are projecting an aura of diligent follow-through, but you are committing to absolutely nothing concrete.
Nothing at all.
You aren't sending a calendar invite. You aren't setting an agenda. You are just keeping the project in a perpetual, safe orbit so you can leave the room feeling like progress was made, even if all you did was agree to talk again later.
You're closing the meeting loop, but keeping the interpersonal connection open just enough to prove you're a team player. Speaking of being a team player, this brings us to the most friction-heavy part of the day. The meetings are over, the action items are distributed, and now you have to actually execute the work alongside your peers. We are shifting from managing up and managing a room to managing horizontal peer-to-peer dynamics.
This is where the language must become incredibly precise.
Why is that?
Because you lack the authority to simply order your peers around, but you still need their help, or you need to fend them off.
John asks a critical question. What do you do when a colleague asks for your help, but you are simply too busy? Emma offers a few visceral idioms. "I have a lot on my plate," or "I'm up to my neck." But the anchor word she focuses on is swamped. I'm swamped at the moment.
Let's examine the imagery of the swamp. It's a very evocative metaphor. The swamp is stagnant, it's muddy, it pulls you downward. Every step requires immense effort.
It's the feeling of drowning in the minutiae of your tasks. It's a very vivid, almost emotional cry for help, like, "I cannot take your project because I am sinking."
Yes, very emotional.
But as the source material progresses, Emma introduces a different word when talking about declining tasks via email. She introduces the concept of capacity. I don't have the capacity for this.
This is perhaps one of the most significant linguistic shifts in modern corporate culture, the transition from emotional or physical descriptions of exhaustion to structural terminology.
It completely changes the paradigm. If a coworker asks me to review a deck and I say, "I'm too tired" or "I'm too stressed out," I am making a confession about my personal fortitude.
Right.
I'm admitting that I, as a human being, am failing to handle the pressure of the job.
It sounds like a personal deficiency. But capacity is an engineering term. A server has a data capacity. A suspension bridge has a weight capacity. When a bridge collapses, we don't say the bridge lacked willpower.
No, we don't.
We say the load exceeded its structural capacity.
That is so profound. By adopting the language of machinery and infrastructure, you entirely depersonalize the refusal. You are telling your colleague, "My desire to help you is infinite, but the mathematical reality of my workload has reached its absolute structural limit."
It's a matter of logistics rather than unwillingness.
It's not that I won't help you, it's that the physics of my schedule literally will not allow it.
It removes all the guilt, It protects your reputation as a collaborative employee, and it shields your colleague from feeling personally rejected. They aren't being brushed off. They're just hitting a logistical wall.
But let's say you haven't hit that wall. You do have the capacity, and you are going to work with someone. John asks how to initiate that, and Emma provides the word collaborate. Now, John asks a very smart, clarifying question here. He wants to know if collaborate is just a synonym for cooperate.
And Emma's very careful to distinguish between the two. She defines cooperating as simply helping someone or working together in a general sense. But collaboration implies working closely together to actively create something new.
It's fascinating how collaboration has undergone this massive PR campaign in the business world. Like, if I tell my boss, Jim and I are cooperating, it sounds like we are toddlers in a sandbox who have finally stopped throwing sand at each other.
Or it sounds like a police interrogation.
Yeah.
The witness is cooperating.
Yes. It implies mere compliance, like we are just staying out of each other's way on the assembly line.
It implies a lack of friction, but also a lack of synergy.
Exactly. But collaboration, that sounds elite. It sounds like two jazz musicians improvising on stage. It implies a high-level, dynamic merging of intellects to produce a superior product. You don't get a bonus for cooperating, you get a promotion for collaborating.
And the mechanism for initiating this high-level collaboration is embedded in another word Emma highlights, input. She suggests asking, I'd appreciate your input on this.
Which she defines as someone's ideas or contribution. Here is my theory on this, and I want to know if you agree. Why do we ask for input instead of just saying, can you help me with this? My theory is that asking for help frames the request as a burden. You are handing them a chore.
You are creating a deficit in their day.
Right. But if I ask for your input, I am not asking for labor. I am asking for your wisdom. I am signaling that your specific, unique intellect is the missing ingredient in my project. It's weaponized flattery.
Your theory is entirely accurate. It's a psychological bypass. Most professionals suffer from a chronic lack of time, but they have an abundance of vanity.
We all do.
People love to share their opinions and demonstrate their expertise. By asking for input, you are appealing directly to their professional pride. You are converting a request for free labor into a compliment.
I couldn't possibly move forward without your visionary input on this spreadsheet formatting, Jim. It works every time. We all fall for it.
It is an incredibly effective deployment of Office English.
Okay, so we've collaborated, we've stroked egos, we've shared our input. But eventually, all of this beautiful teamwork hits the unforgiving wall of reality. The deadline.
The clock runs out.
Time becomes the enemy. How you communicate when the pressure spikes defines your professional reputation.
In the source material, Emma freely admits that she is not always good at managing deadlines, and they explore the vocabulary of time, starting with the word prioritize.
Deciding what gets done first when you can't do it all.
Right. But the critical moment in this section is when they discuss the word urgent. Emma notes it's for things that need immediate, fast attention. However, John steps in with a crucial warning. He tells Emma, be careful not to overuse urgent or people won't take it seriously.
This is the corporate edition of The Boy Who Cried Wolf.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a phenomenon known as semantic satiation. When a word is repeated so often in a specific context, the brain temporarily loses the ability to connect the word to its meaning. It just becomes a sound. Or in the case of an inbox, it just becomes visual noise.
If every single email you send has the little red exclamation point, the exclamation point ceases to exist. It becomes invisible.
Exactly.
What you are actually doing when you label everything as urgent is creating an atmosphere of perpetual panic. And humans cannot operate in perpetual panic. Eventually, the nervous system, or in this case, your team, just numbs out.
It completely erodes your credibility as a manager of time. If a colleague knows that your urgent request actually just means, I would prefer this today, but tomorrow is fine, they will start mentally filtering your request.
Yeah.
They will assign their own internal deadlines to your projects, stripping you of your authority.
You lose control of the timeline, so you have to protect the word urgent. But what happens when, despite all your prioritization, you are just going to fail? You are going to miss the deadline. John's advice here goes against every natural human instinct. He says you must communicate early, before the deadline passes.
Because human nature urges us to hide our failures. We want to put our heads down, stay silent, work until 3 a.m., and magically produce the deliverable before anyone notices we were struggling.
We want to maintain the illusion of effortless competence.
But silence in the face of a looming deadline is a betrayal of the system. John introduces the phrase, running behind. I'm running behind on this.
It's an admission of guilt, isn't it?
It is an admission of delay, but not necessarily guilt. If you pair it with John's next suggestion, asking for an extension, you completely alter the aerodynamics of the failure. Think of a project as an airplane in flight. Missing a deadline without warning is crashing the plane into the mountain. Everyone is blindsided, and the damage is catastrophic.
But saying, I am running behind 2 days in advance.
That is calling air traffic control to report a headwind.
Oh, wow.
You are providing the system with data. Honest early communication is infinitely better than missing the deadline entirely. It allows managers to reallocate resources, push back client meetings, or adjust dependent projects. You transform yourself from a chaotic liability into a proactive communicator who is simply managing a logistical reality. You fail gracefully.
I love that. You aren't failing, you are reporting a headwind. But let's look at the best case scenario. You didn't crash. You didn't need an extension. You crushed the project.
The ideal outcome.
Emma asks how to announce that you are finished, looking for something more polished than just saying, I'm done. And John offers a word of immense power. Finalize.
I've finalized the document.
Let's look at the mechanics of this word. When John explains it, he says it means you've completely finished something and it is in its final form. Nothing more needs to be done. To me, this is like pouring hot wax on an envelope and stamping it with a seal.
It is a definitive, closed-door statement.
Think about the psychological difference when you hand something to your manager. If you say, I finished the report, you are implicitly leaving the door open for their authority. You are saying, I have completed my labor, now I await your judgment and your revisions. You are acting as a subordinate task executor.
But finalize shifts that dynamic entirely.
Entirely. When you say, I have finalized the report, you are projecting supreme, unassailable competence. You are telling your manager, this document has reached its ultimate evolutionary state, do not touch it.
Right.
You are asserting ownership over the outcome, not just the labor. It signals to a manager that you are operating at a higher level of autonomy.
It's a remarkable example of how a single vocabulary swap can elevate your perceived value in an organization.
Okay, but we have to address the fact that we don't always get to look our bosses in the eye and say, finalize. So much of our corporate life is trapped in the asynchronous void, phones and emails. This is where language gets incredibly rigid because it lacks all the context of body language and tone.
John points out the highly formulaic nature of the professional phone call. Good morning, company name. This is your name speaking. But the interesting artifact here is when Emma asks about handling a call for someone who isn't there, John teaches her the phrase, can I take a message?
In a world dominated by instant messaging and shared digital workspaces, physically writing down a message for someone feels like something out of a black and white movie.
It does feel analog, but it serves a vital purpose in establishing trust. When you offer to take a message, writing down info for later, you are acting as a temporary steward of a relationship that isn't yours.
That makes sense.
You are demonstrating to the outside caller that your organization is cohesive and reliable, even when the specific point of contact is absent.
You are protecting the perimeter of the company. But as formal as the phone is, email is where the real linguistic gymnastics happen. John brings up the classic email opener. I hope this email finds you well. Now be honest, do we ever actually genuinely care if the email finds them well? If I am emailing accounting about a broken expense report, I am not deeply invested in their spiritual or physical wellness.
Of course not. It's entirely performative. It acts as a digital throat clear.
A ritualistic buffer.
Exactly. An email is essentially a sudden, uninvited demand for someone's attention appearing on their screen. If you just launch straight into the demand, it feels aggressive and transactional. I hope this finds you well acts as a cushion. It mimics the pleasantries of a physical greeting, softening the intrusion before you get to the actual work.
And the most fraught part of that work is when they ignore your email. Emma asks about continuing a conversation, and John introduces the mechanism of the follow-up. I'm following up on my previous email. We have to expose the subtext of the follow-up because it is legendary.
The follow-up is the ultimate polite weapon of the asynchronous office.
It is the socially acceptable way to say, I know you are ignoring me, you know you're ignoring me, and I am formally demanding an answer.
But the brilliance of the phrase, just following up, is the plausible deniability it provides to both parties. By framing it as a follow-up, you are pretending to assume that the other person is simply incredibly busy, or that the email was lost in the technological ether. You are refusing to accuse them of negligence.
It ensures things don't get forgotten while maintaining total politeness. It's passive aggressiveness wrapped in a warm blanket of professional courtesy. You get to poke them sharply in the ribs, but you do it with a smile.
Exactly.
And John notes that when you finally do get their attention and make a request, you must maintain that courtesy. You don't write, "Send me the file." You write, "Could you please?" or "I would appreciate it if you could."
You are maintaining the illusion of choice. In reality, they are required to send you the file to do their job. But phrasing it as a request rather than a command preserves their dignity and keeps the hierarchical tension low.
It is a massive, complex dance. And all of these steps, the emails, the meetings, the deadlines, they all lead us to the final and perhaps most critical phase of our deep dive.
The human element.
Yes, the emotional intelligence required to actually survive the humans you are working with. Navigating the fallout of errors, giving credit, and knowing when to clock out are the final pieces of the puzzle.
This is where true leadership vocabulary is tested.
Let's start with the hardest scenario. You made a massive mistake. The server crashed, the client is furious, the numbers are wrong. Emma asks how to apologize professionally. John delivers what I consider the heavy artillery of corporate language. "I take full responsibility for this mistake."
Emma immediately recognizes the weight of this. She compares it to saying "my bad" and notes how much more professional John's phrase sounds.
So what does this all mean? "My bad" is what you say when you accidentally bump someone's shoulder in the hallway. It treats a systemic failure as a casual oops. But my question to you is, isn't saying "I take full responsibility" dangerous?
How so?
If the CEO is looking for a head to roll, aren't you just putting your own neck on the chopping block? Why not spread the blame? Like, well, the vendor was late and Jim didn't send the data, so I made an error.
Because spreading the blame initiates an investigation. It creates drama, defensiveness, and prolonged organizational anxiety.
Yeah.
When you step forward and say, "I take full responsibility," you are deploying a highly counterintuitive power move.
Wait, really? How is admitting fault a power move?
Because you are completely absorbing the kinetic energy of the crisis. By taking full responsibility, you instantly terminate the blame game. There is nowhere else for the anger or the inquiry to go. You shut down the witch hunt.
You essentially build a firewall around the mistake.
Precisely. And in doing so, you project immense maturity and control. You don't look like a victim of circumstance. You look like a leader who is unbothered by the weight of accountability. And as John points out, you instantly pivot from the apology to the solution. "I am working to fix this immediately." You disarm the anger by falling on your own sword, and then you immediately show them you know how to heal the wound.
It's staggering how effective that is. If a manager is primed to yell at you and you look them in the eye and say, "I take full responsibility and here is the solution," they are left with nothing to say but, okay, proceed. You've stolen their thunder entirely.
Now, the inverse of taking blame is giving credit. And John introduces the vocabulary for praising peers. Phrases like, "Great job on the presentation," or "thanking a colleague for going above and beyond."
Doing extra work that wasn't strictly required by their job description. I find giving credit fascinating because it is the cheapest currency in the office, but it buys the most valuable asset, loyalty.
It establishes a reciprocal relationship. We talked earlier about capacity and needing an extension. Who is more likely to help you when you are genuinely drowning? The colleague you ignored for 6 months, or the colleague whose extra effort you publicly recognize at a team meeting?
Exactly. When you say someone went above and beyond, you are depositing social capital into their account, knowing you will likely need to make a withdrawal later. It's entirely self-serving, wrapped in altruism. Which brings us finally to the end of the day, the rituals of clocking out.
The best part of the day.
Emma asks about taking breaks, specifically lunch. And John says people will often say, "I'm going to take a break," or ask, "Do you want to grab lunch?"
The verb grab is the focal point here. John explains it means to get something quickly.
It reveals the underlying heartbeat of the corporate environment. We don't dine, we don't savor, we don't even really eat lunch, we grab it.
It implies a state of perpetual anxious motion.
Even our designated moments of rest have to be framed as casual, efficient, and urgent. "I'm just going to grab a sandwich." You are signaling to the entire office that you are not lingering, you are not indulging in leisure, you are executing a biological necessity as rapidly as possible so you can return to the machinery of the company.
It's the performance of dedication.
And that performance culminates at the actual end of the day. John mentions the standard sign-offs for leaving, like "have a good evening" or "I'm heading out." But Emma presses him on what to say when you are working late. And John introduces overtime. working beyond normal hours, like staying till 7 p.m. when normal hours are 9 to 5.
And what's vital here isn't just the definition of overtime, it's the communication of it.
Yes. If you stay until 8 p.m. to finish a deck, but you don't send an email or a Slack message time-stamped at 8 p.m., did the overtime even happen? The hidden script dictates that extra effort must be visible. You use these phrases, "I'm going to stay late to finalize this," to ensure that your suffering or your dedication is properly documented in the minds of your superiors before you log off.
The labor only counts if the network observes it.
So bringing this massive journey to a close, let's look at the big takeaway of what John and Emma have inadvertently outlined for us. We started this deep dive by claiming that an ESL instructional transcript was actually a profound sociological blueprint.
And the evidence overwhelmingly supports that. Office English is not a passive list of definitions. It is a vital tool for establishing boundaries, showing respect, and managing your professional image.
Jen explicitly advises listeners at the end of the source material to start small, to take just a few of these phrases and practice them in real life until they feel natural. And that is the absolute truth of it. These phrases don't feel natural at first because they aren't natural. They are highly engineered tools.
You are learning to operate a piece of heavy social machinery.
Exactly. So whether you are the CEO steering the ship or the new intern trying not to drown on day one, you are relying on these exact linguistic tools every day. You deploy the word capacity to protect your time and prevent burnout without sounding weak. You deploy the word prioritize to manage expectations and keep your sanity. You use clarify to protect your ego and gently manage your boss.
You are constantly actively navigating an intricate web of egos, deadlines, and hierarchies using this incredibly specific coded language.
Which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over as you transition back into your own workday. If we all quietly understand how this game works, if we all secretly know that when I say I have a conflict, I'm really just deploying a polite smoke bomb because I don't want to attend your useless meeting.
What does that say about corporate culture?
It suggests a profound level of collective denial.
Or perhaps it suggests that the ultimate mastery of office English isn't about perfectly expressing our true feelings at all, because unfiltered feelings destroy organizations.
They create too much friction?
Right. Perhaps ultimate professional mastery is about agreeing to a shared, polite fiction, a highly choreographed fiction that allows hundreds of different humans with different sensory needs, different vanities, and different breaking points to occupy the same space and work together safely and productively without tearing each other apart. So the next time you hear someone say, just following up, or I see your point, but recognize it for what it is. It isn't just small talk. It's the structural integrity of the entire company holding itself together. A perfectly deployed verbal shock absorber.
Exactly. Okay, that is our deep dive for today. I am going to go finalize my inbox, and I will touch base with you next time.